Today we're going to learn about clubs and conferences. Before we do that, a drop of housekeeping. First of all, there's the thank you section for the course that's happening today. However, Judy Siegel is supposed to be joining us for that, and since she's not here, we're going to do that a little bit later. But yeah, thank you to everyone who helped make this conference, and this Yishtabut possible. Regarding the assignments, this is a reminder for whoever didn't complete them. Some of you already have. To first complete assignment 3 in the asynchronous makeup, you can do them both together. As I've clarified for some people, if like the assignment 3 is to make a video class, asynchronous is to have the students watch a video class, so you could actually do them together and write the review on both. However, if you'd like to do them separately, I sent some options of videos that can be used, and I went over the instructions in depth last time. So right now, what I want us to do is understand how MUN conferences work and our role within the MUN conference. And after that, we'll do a general wrap up. So the 3 words that I said that really encompass the teacher's role in MUN, and we had a really good discussion with that at the second half of last week's class, if we all remember, is logistics, relationship, and support. Logistics, because if you want to have an MUN club, you need to find the hours. You need to make sure that something can work to go to the conferences. Relationships with other administration in the school is important to maintain MUN, and support for our students that I'm going to talk about today. As far as MUN's club structures in high school, it's important that there is a grown-up supervising the process. MUN is something which, without the guidance of teachers or coaches, can fall into the realm of youth group or an activity which doesn't really develop the same types of skills and disciplines. And by the way, also what I talked about, like, incentives and creating an MUN space that you want to operate in. And this is very, very, very important. As teachers, we have, many responsibilities. There are extra things being, dumped on, not always, paid for, not always recognized. And, all these things keep popping up. So for MUN to work, it really needs to be something where it's not this joy of watching the students thrive. It also needs to be a structure that we can continue with and, develop and grow this program out. So today, we're going to talk about MUN conferences, how the MUN conferences work, and our role as teachers of the conferences. After that, we'll take a short break, and then we'll continue to where we go from here, review of the course, say some kind words, and, call it a day. So MUN conferences. I want to review what I talked about conferences last time from our role as teachers, and that ties into what I said about signing up for the online conference, the READ conference that we have at the end of the year, which is now about a month and a half away. So it's really, coming up fast. So the participation requires, first of all, signing up students, like we talked about, clearing the day. For this conference, because it's online, we don't need the next 2, which are parent permission and transportation. But if you take your students to a physical MUN, whether you do it once or twice a year, there's, a whole, say salat involved. And signing up the students and making sure you have spots, clearing the day, getting the parental permissions and the permissions of everyone necessary, and organizing transport, these things need to happen, as well as the preparation, which we've learned to do through the majority of this course. MUN 101, 102, speeches, rules, encouraging dynamic, writing, all those things will only happen if we create the place for it to go. The approvals that are required are from, first of all, parents. Parent signatures are required for trips. This is how it works. The homeroom teacher should be made aware, and the Rakaz Shikhva. So when you have an MUN you're doing, whether online or otherwise, these things need to happen. And this is why them understanding, that MUN is important, that MUN is fun, that, MUN is an activity that they, should support and get in on. You can print a nice picture of the kids in suits or a nice screenshot with a thank you printed out for them physically makes a really big difference. Like really show off. MUN is not an easy thing to do or, get started. Like it's a really fun activity, but you see that like by its nature, we can't just, do it in our classroom if we want to take it to where it can go. So thank you letters, appreciation, all these things really, really go a long way. Some good tips are, first of all, signing everyone important at the beginning of the year, especially for parents. Getting that will be helpful later when they decide that they may have changed their mind or they may have forgot, these things can happen. And getting the principal and school support for MUN. Our discussion last week really emphasized the difference between like schools and their culture. As a principal was like, okay, I love this, let's make it happen. How do we make it happen? Versus we have enough things, I don't really see the value to this. Well, we already have something similar. And that is the difference. So when it comes to conference signing up, the thing I would generally recommend is, and this is of course for who is able to, start MUN at whatever different capacity. But when you're starting MUN, sometimes if you don't have the space to get a club or a fixed hour for MUN, and now is the time to ask for hours. But if that is not a possibility, then try to get the students to a conference. Getting to a conference is something which is much easier as a one-off event, which can show results than a fixed meeting of a club. Although a club will teach much more and give you the space to really work on and develop the different things that we talked about. So that's it from the organizational perspective. A little more on that later. So now I want to talk a bit about the conferences, because for us, we've done simulations, but we don't really know we know we're supposed to take them to a conference. We know we're preparing an opening speech. We know what a simulation works like, but what are these conferences we've been talking about for the past, number of weeks? So this is, I want to talk here about, first of all, the conference schedule, the structure, and the registration process from a teacher's perspective. So the MUN conference schedule is not a particularly magical entity. It looks, something like this. And from a teacher, from our point of view, we just need to be aware of the beats and where we come in to the picture. So first of all, when you get to the school, there's registration, where you show up to a table which is manned by, someone, could be students from the hosting club, oftentimes, to know who is there. This is an important part of the process for the organizers, because they need to know, did all the countries show up? Am I going to have, a Russia or, Tajikistan and the World Health Organization? How many participants do we have? Do we need to make modifications? Do we need more or less lunches? So registration will be you or maybe a team captain with you saying, we are here. Here's how many of us we are. Then there's the opening ceremony. The opening ceremony I talked about quite a bit last class. But the main point is that for whoever's hosting the conference, a conference is, for many schools, an MUN conference is a big production. It's something which involves many moving parts, and it usually plays into a larger structure than just the MUN club. There are a few schools that are an exception where MUN is quite prevalent and there are a lot of extracurriculars. So it's like, okay, it's this conference today, it's that one tomorrow, but that's pretty rare. Usually MUN is a big thing for the organizers. Oftentimes we will know one of the teachers. I think the dream for the Reed conference would be to have it, moved, different schools every year. And that means that every, few years, one of us is putting on a big production. So the opening ceremony, while it may not be the most fascinating for, the audience, because they bring, the RIA speaker and the principal and maybe someone, else who's regional, and maybe a student will speak. That happens, that takes place, and the students should learn to sit through it. It's quite exciting for students in the first one. And after they make friends in other clubs, to see their friends, they may be chit-chatting throughout. But just be aware that the opening ceremony could get less interesting as you do more of them, but understand for the hosts, they are very important. Next,
Can I ask, is this the schedule for the June 8th conference? Or, I mean, obviously not, because it's from 9 to 3. So how would you break down the conference that you want us
I'll
to
finish
do?
explaining the parts here, and then I'll tell you what our schedule will be for the June one. This is so then you have a session, the committee session, whether online or in person. Everyone goes to their committee and they do MUN, opening speeches, roll call, the first discussions. There's a break, a second session where they go back.
Daniel, what do you mean go to their committee?
Sorry, Ravi, you had an echo.
I'm asking, what do you mean go to their committee? Aren't we all in the food organization?
So yeah, so for our conference, we're all going to be the same committee, but the students are being split up into different committees between them. So for example, every student with the number 1 will go to one room. All the students with Vietnam 2 will go with all the 2s. That we can, everyone's talking about the same topic, but we're duplicating the committees. That's in this case. In other conferences where they have a few different committees, the students will go to their committees. Sometimes when conferences get very full, they will duplicate a committee just like we have. So there'll be, you know, the Disarmament Committee 1 and Disarmament Committee 2, and they'll, you know, move students between them. So second session, coffee break, session 3. After that is feedback. Usually there's feedback from the chair of the committee on what they saw. Can be very, very valuable. Then there's a closing ceremony. The closing ceremony is very different from the opening ceremony. If the opening ceremony is, you know, long and with all the checks and balances, the closing ceremony is where the participants get the diplomacy awards, the awards for being the best diplomat in a room. And this turns into a very exciting part of the ceremony. There's a place where the students and yourselves, we get into it. We're like, you know, cheering them on. You will watch students elatedly be very, very happy. You will watch, you know, kids be quite unhappy. The most unhappy is when a chair makes a wrong decision. Sometimes the chairs are human, and there are varying levels of MUN. Like I said, MUN accountability, like we're used to from the Ishtalmut, doesn't exist everywhere. So be aware sometimes your student may have deserved something they didn't get, but hopefully most of the time that won't be the case. So each chair gets up, says a few words about their committee, and then says who gets the awards. The customary awards in Israel are, first there's a shout out, which is recognizing someone who didn't get an award, but was not far off. Conferences and the size of the committee limit the amount of awards that are given. So because the awards are limited, not everyone can get one. So oftentimes a committee of 15 will get 2 awards, and a committee of 45 might get 5. But it's capped, whatever way it is. So the shout outs recognize that there was something there, but not enough. Then there are honorable mentions. Honorable mentions is somewhere between, let's say, 3rd and 5th place. There's no real order. It's someone who did quite well to get the honorable mention. Then there's distinguished delegate, which there can be 1 or 2 of those, and that's usually 2nd place. And then there's the best delegate, which is the award for whoever made the largest impact in the committee. Now, getting the award can be for many different things. It is usually a combination of things we've learned in this course: getting a coalition, giving good speeches, making sure the ideas get in writing, and then taking the writing and getting it passed with a majority. But this can't be done by themselves. So there are many variables to what makes the best delegate, specifically, but overall, holistically, it should be the delegate who had the largest impact on the room and made the biggest impact on the content voted on while getting a majority. It's hard to get best delegate as the head of the opposition. You can get 2nd place or sometimes an honorable mention from that position. After the closing ceremony is the goodbyes, whether it's online MUN. I've seen online conferences where the students are very happy to hang out for a while afterwards. Usually this is conferences that end in the evening. Physical locations also, it's time for everyone to say goodbye, exchange Instagram with their new friends, and get on the buses and go home. So that's what an MUN conference looks like. Our conference that we're going to do is not going to have registration. We're going to start with an opening ceremony, which will be less than an hour, but this is still a hafakan, something very special. So we'll be probably, a few speeches. After that, we have our first session. The schedule will probably have a session, lunch break, second session, feedback, closing ceremony. The closing ceremony will happen just like I said here. The chairs of the different committees are going to be recapping what they saw and giving the awards. This is something like I'll be speaking to Melissa and Judy about the guidelines, whether we're doing it with like some considerations or just completely regular MUN. And there we call it a day. It's going to be done in the online campus format in a very large, Zoom, where the breakout rooms are already open. There'll be teacher staff rooms, and you will be able to move between your students in the different committees without needing to switch Zoom links, which is something much more comfortable.
So will they not have a break, you're saying?
They will have a break, always
Okay.
break. Students definitely need breaks.
And I just asked, what's the difference between session 1 and session 2? Like what, it's just more of the same, or like in session 1 you discuss, in session 2 you write, or like how?
So that's an excellent question, Orly. There is no rule for what has to happen in the sessions, but there usually is there's something it's called the 5 Acts of MUN.
It's like an expectation, I assume.
Like usually the first session, you try to, you get through all the opening statements, start the general speakers list, and maybe if you're lucky, get a moderated caucus. The second session is more focused on the writing and coalition building. And, in a shorter conference like ours, the goal is to vote on something. I've seen in longer MUNs, like 2-3 day, or even a full day conference like this, where we see the session 1 starts at 10 and session 3 ends at 6. So even though there are breaks, you can get a good 6 hours of debate out of this, which is more than you would get from there's always time for breaks and less. So this is, I think that the consideration to take here is, especially in in-person MUNs, but also online, is the breaks. The breaks are going to be the time where the students will come to us with questions. They're the time for us to provide moral support, and are really there to help out. What students should be doing during the breaks, unless everyone really takes a break, is to continue lobbying and working on their documents. I can say from myself, both as a delegate and a chair, breaks were never breaks. They were never breaks. We have more writing to do. We have, other blocks to work with. If you're in a team of 2, one gets lunch, the other one stays to work. So that's just the MUN reality. Just to answer Dvora's questions, if you miss the opening ceremony, there's no real problem. It's better to have the students there. The first opening ceremony that students have for MUN is it is a special experience. People have speeches, they say nice things. I was simply saying sort of preparing for later on, where they may seem similar after amount of time. The topics for MUN conferences should be made available weeks before the conference. I will talk about that a little bit later. For our conference, we already know the topic. All you need is to pick the countries of your students and allocate them, and they can already know what they're going to be and where. Okay, so let's move on to the next part, which is the MUN conference structure. Okay, so how is an MUN conference built? So this is first of all, the who's who at an MUN conference. There are the delegates. These are participants who role play as diplomats. These are our students. Our students represent delegates. During this Ishtalmut, we represented delegates. Next are the chairs. The chairs are the facilitators of the simulation. I was a chair for our simulation, allocating speaking, having everyone walk through the rules. Next are admins. Admins are student volunteers who are not participating in the conference. Often they're from the hosting institution, but they can also come from other clubs. If you want students to watch how MUN works, they can be admins. They pass notes, bring water. and provide logistical support. Personally, if your students are up to it, I would say just make them delegates. I have often seen really bright kids who come in to be admins because they don't want to take part. And then they would tell me, like, Daniel, like, we just wish we could say something. We wish we could make some kind of impact, because as passing the notes, like they're just watching the simulation and they see where they could fit in. So it's better to be a delegate and participate than be an admin, not be allowed to participate and need to do so. Next is the Secretariat. These are the student conference organizers. Their degree of organization, whether it's logistics or logistics and academics, can vary, but they are called the Secretariat. They have titles. I'm going to get into the titles in the next slides. And then there's the advisors or faculty advisors, which is us, the teachers who manage the MUN conference or club. Most conferences, whether online or in person, will have a teacher's lounge where you can, meet other teachers. Some teachers who are just there to make sure the kids get there alive, take time to grade exams at that time. Other advisors will walk between the different rooms. It's about striking a balance. But everyone at an MUN conference here normally is going to be one of these roles. Okay, so now I want to break down the different roles within the MUN conference. Not everything that I'm saying now is going to be relevant for immediate application. Not all these roles will exist in the READ conference that we're going to, but hopefully for next year, where there will be hopefully at least one, READ MUN conference and more MUN activities, this type of structure helps us understand what is going on and who we can talk to about what. So for the MUN conference management, this is what the structure looks like. There's the advisor. So if, let's say, you're organizing a conference, you will have the students in charge who you are going to talk to about the different responsibilities. If you're at another conference, the student in charge will have an advisor or more than one advisor who you can speak to, who doesn't have, who's basically supervising the whole, endeavor. They may not be aware of every detail, but they should know where to direct you if you need something. So the student in charge is called the Secretary General, like the United Nations has a Secretary General, and their role is managing the other different departments. Now, at a conference, at a university conference, you would have all of these roles. There'd probably be a deputy, a head of logistics, marketing, academics, delegates or applications, and finance. For high school MUNs, some of these roles don't exist. In our case, there won't be finance or marketing in the same ways because the students go where their teachers take them. So it's much more of an activity where sort of we as the educators will coordinate between ourselves and the students will show up. So the logistics team structure goes along the following lines. Their responsibilities are to make sure the non-committee parts of the conference run smoothly. So they organize the guest speakers sometimes. They'll organize the socials, which can be the fun activities during the breaks or at the end of the day. And they can work on making sure that no one has something they're allergic to in the food. So that's the logistics team structure. And for these, you can, if you're thinking of organizing an activity, students can manage these different things as part of putting on the production. Now, regarding marketing, this is a little bit tricky because marketing is supposed to spread word about the conference. However, students normally can't go to MUN by themselves. So this is why if you are organizing such an activity, having students invested in marketing may end up being frustrating for the students because they won't be able to get results for their work. They can make a lot of fun Instagram posts and message people, but if the other school's teacher doesn't say okay and get the days approved, they're not going to go anywhere. So for high school teams, I generally have them, work on, if anything, making pretty placards, decorating the campus, but not being responsible for attendance. Now they can make buzz with other groups of students, but it depends how much flexibility you have to go to a conference where the kids are marketing to each other. Next is academics. The responsibilities of the academics team is to select the chairs, review the study guides, and supervise the chairs during the conference, which is very important. I've done this role many times. It was, you'd be surprised how many chairs decide that they can go get a coffee during an unmoderated caucus where the most important merger is happening. You'd be surprised by the amount of chairs who may be, looking at their phone or not paying attention to the room or taking notes. This really depends on the role here, which is the USG of academics. And this is sort of the difference between an MUN club that is guided by, a training plan or not. Because MUN can be logistics. It can be just, get some classrooms, have someone who knows the rules allocate speaking, but to making sure that the chairs are really evaluating who has the most impact, that the chairs know what the different blocks are doing and how they interact is the chair's responsibility. But if they're not doing it, the person you would talk to is the one who's in charge of the chairs. This role does not exist in every conference. In some of them, the Secretary General can do this role. And in some conferences, specifically like 12th grade final projects, you won't have either. And in these cases, it can be frustrating for us because we train our kids in school. We teach them to write their opening speeches and do well. And they say the chair's not paying attention. So just be aware this can happen. If there is a conference which has this role, it's a very good sign. It means there is some understanding of MUN. And if there is a head of academics, they will be supervising the chairs and making sure things are working well. So that's the academic team structure. You will have chairs at every conference. How they're managed and how it works or not can also depend. I was a chair at conferences where I had no supervision and the conference organizer said, do whatever you want. So I feel I did a good job, but some of my peers didn't. So it was really left to us. And that's something which can happen, especially now as MUN is really just starting to take off in Israel. You'll see many different varying levels of how MUN works. Next, we have the delegates team structure or applications. And this is the team who will allocate delegates to countries and take care of troubleshooting. You will have someone like this for conferences that are not our online conference. For us, the students or you can pick the countries immediately and you allocate them to your students. When you sign up for an MUN, besides this, you'll say, okay, we have 25 students. You will get an email or an Excel with the different countries and committees, and you will allocate them to your students and send it back to them. So that's part of the process. Teachers, we are often in charge of allocating our students. Sometimes our students will apply directly to the conference and someone else will allocate them. So this is the overview of the different, powers that be and entities involved. We see here that it really is, it's event management for Model UN, event management. And for us, if we feel one of our students is allergic to something, we find who's involved in logistics and we speak to whoever is, involved in food and try to find something. If our student says the chair is not calling on me in the room, they are not paying attention to anyone in the back row, you would speak to the head of academics or the Secretary General to tell the chair to pay more attention to students in other areas. So in MUN, when you go to a conference, the point of this area is so that we don't feel lost, that we understand that there is, a structure. And while we can go to the teacher in charge, sometimes they may be overwhelmed with, the 200 students in a bunch of classrooms, and we need to make do. Finally is the conference registration process. So the process is what I talked about before. Find a conference, sign up for a conference, pay for the conference, get the allocations, allocate the students, prepare for the conference, and go to the conference. However, even with this, there are a few tips and pointers that I want to go through. So number one, when you find a conference, you need to make sure the dates work for everyone, for the homeroom teacher, for the holidays, for regional considerations. This is where homework needs to be done, knowing what the different scheduling considerations and constraints are. Makes a very, very big difference. Number two, when you sign up for the conference, pay attention to how many students you can bring. Sometimes the conferences are capped. And when a conference is capped, it's a real bummer if you have 30 students involved in MUN, you can only bring 10. Not every conference is capped. And this is why regional cooperation, and something that I hope will grow from this year onward, It's much better to have conferences that aren't capped, but the larger conferences that are more popular, if like only a few clubs really make accountable good conferences and everyone wants to go, you may end up with limits on the students who can go. So it's better to look for conferences that don't limit the amount of students, so you can really bring as many as are interested and have the ability to scale up. Another thing to be aware of is registration. Some conferences can fill up pretty quickly, so it's best to register, pay quickly, because spaces can run out. In 2018, 2019, MUN was very much a seller's market. Conferences filled up. There were not enough conferences because many of the clubs and schools wanted to do MUN, weren't proactive in creating them, and had a very limited array of MUNs to go to.
What do you mean by pay? Is it like the one that we're having in June is something that we have to pay for?
The one in June is free, but normally in MUN, especially in person MUN, there are costs. The hosts will be giving lunch to everybody, snacks, maybe printing out certificates. So conferences will have a cost, whether the school pays or you collect them from parents. It's something which needs to be done. This is why if you are able to, let's say, for example, get parental support for the MUN program, if you say, okay, this is going to cost, 1,200 shekel in the beginning of the year, and it's going to involve 3 conferences, some lectures by a coach, and 2 buses. That can save the headache than running after everyone each time. And all it takes, again, and I think we all know the WhatsApp dynamic, send the parents pictures of their kid smiling and standing, dressed in formal business attire with some flags, and they'll be like, all right, we like this thing. And the kids will be praising it themselves. So MUN conferences cost money. The price can vary. If it's a one-day conference and they really only get like some snacks and a lunch, it can cost 50 shekel. If it's a 2-day conference and you're paying for accommodation, that can already be a few hundred. If it's, a conference which is, multi-day accommodation, even more. And if it's out of the country, bichlal. So, and keep that in mind. I said, if you're getting any, to get to a conference, that's a bus. Buses cost money. So this is why building it in and understanding that there is that kind of support, even if the principal or the school puts down the money and chase down parents later, it needs to be factored in. I have seen schools miss out on allocations because they were running after parents and they lost their spots. So this is why, again, where possible, to start the year, send a letter to the parents saying, if you want your kids to be in the program, sign this form that you commit to these dates, that the kids can, be in pictures, everyone is, COVID safe, and so on and so forth. To be ready that when you sign up, you can make sure to get all the spots that you want for your students.
Daniel, it says find the Mun Conference. Where will I look for them?
So there is an MUN conference calendar, and we're also going to be posting about conferences in the Ambassador MUN Teachers Group, which I hope you're all in. And if not, I'll post the WhatsApp link at the end of the class today.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, another very important thing to understand is getting the country and committee allocations. And if there's one golden tip for conference preparation, I'm going to give it right now, which is this. The topics for high school MUN are almost always published in advance. As soon as you see the topic, assuming it is clearly worded and defined, and you get your country, start preparing with your students. Don't all wait for the study guide. If the study guide is written by students, the level may vary, but sometimes the guides can arrive very late. There are times the guides have arrived 2 days before the conference. And why? The students who are chairing can be from a few different schools with different MUN cultures, and maybe overwhelmed and busy, or not know, or the guides may be sent back to be revised. There are many different possibilities. So sometimes the guides will arrive late, and waiting for the guides means your students may be more pressured. Usually, if you know the topic and the country, that's enough to get started when the guide arrives. If it arrives with enough time, obviously, more things can be done. But this is something to be aware of.
Did you explain what the study guide is?
Study guide, I'll do that right now. The study guide is sort of like when we had MUN 101 and I talked about the topic, The study guide would be a written version, the equivalent of that. It's a guide which gives you background on the topic being discussed, sometimes with some guiding questions that gives background before. It's actually interesting. I'll have to make a note to explain what study guides are earlier in this slideshow, because for us, we have been working on that well, with the understanding without the name for it. So yes, the conference is responsible because they're not going to have, a Daniel explaining a slideshow or any of you, explaining MUN 101.
That's a shame.
It is a shame. So the conference should email you the allocations for your students and a study guide for every one of the committees they're going to be in. So let's say you have students in the World Health Organization, the Environmental Committee, and the Space Agency. You should get a study guide for each of those, which you will send to your students. It will be a few pages and they should read them and get initial background. A study guide is not the be all and end all. It's usually the beginning of research, not the end. And that's where what we do, comes into play, where we sit and we have them research further, because the guide is a general guide. If it's talking about starvation in North Korea, it's not going to tell Madagascar, about their relationship to North Korea or their relationship to starvation. That's not going to be in the guide. So that's for each student to study on their own. The study guide will not tell them their GDP. It will not tell them their population of each participating country. So their own research, like what we did here in the course, is very important. The guide is the topic review. Just like in MUN 101, I talked about North Korea and we all, learned about the case study. That's what a study guide's supposed to do. Give the information that everybody knows, and then everyone works on their own to find their own connection to the topic.
The students get from me not only the country they're speaking for, but also which community they go to?
When you sign up for the conference, whatever method they have, the conference will tell you which countries you get and which committees. You will then, you will either allocate your students or the conference, depending how it's structured, but yeah, and then the conference will send you the materials to send them.
Thank you.
All right, so allocating students. This is something where I say for teachers, this is about making sure that we are on top of our program. We decide where the students are in choosing. We can let them decide, be part of the process, maybe have our club presidents talk about it, or the more active ones, or we just tell them, you are this and that is it. So the students being involved in the process is really up to you and what you feel is comfortable and works. Prepare for the conference. This can be part of the MUN club time. This can be time specifically allocated towards this. There's no rule of where the preparation needs to happen. And then there's going to the conference and providing support on location, which I'm going to talk about in the next bit. And if you do that, you survived and you got through your first MUN conference. And your students will be thanking you either, directly or inside, because they're too busy, chit-chatting with their friends on the bus about what a great day they had and all the new friends they made, and the special, unique stories. So are there any questions on MUN conferences and, that whole world of things?
Do you have a sample to send us of what a study guide looks like from an actual conference?
There are some on my website. I will look for one afterwards.
Yeah, you can send it to us by email, like you did the last assignment, maybe.
Yeah, it's the study guide normally, it's actually quite interesting because like for me throughout this course, we've been doing MUN. I think I can get an example study guide together, probably even on the topic that we have. So yeah, example study guides can be found. Any other questions? All right. Wonderful.
Wait. How prepared do the students should the preparation for the conference should be that they're creating an opening statement? That should be the preparation.
Yes.
And to have some kind of right, and that will make their stand, and they'll have a clash, and then that's the preparation. Right?
Yes, the deliverable
and
you
to
want to
practice it, practice speaking it and saying it. Okay.
And be aware that also, if you remember the sheet we had to write down the comments of what the others clashes are.
Right. So to practice that as well.
Exactly.
So to do the caucus in the class and And that should be about two lessons, something like that, you dedicate for it?
Yeah, definitely for the rules, because the opening speech is just to give the initial position, but afterwards it's a conversation because, okay, we know where we start, but now we need to get a majority. So the students need to understand they're not going to speak just once. If they're not comfortable, obviously they can, wait and someone will approach them for their vote. But Model UN is multiple, speeches, which now engage what others have said. But for getting a student ready for an MUN conference, the main deliverable is to first, show up, then have an opening speech ready and deliver the speech. By the time the opening speeches are done, a decent amount of time will have passed. They'll have heard the other speeches, they'll have their notes, and can start having the conversation.
Daniel, what's the purpose of a position paper, which I've heard some of my students mention?
Yes, so a position paper is normally not done here for one-day conferences, but the paper is a place where the delegate summarizes their position and starts usually with presenting their general position on the topic, their relation to the topic, and then finally their policy proposals in 3 or 4 paragraphs. It's a requirement for conferences which want to make sure the students do some level of prep beforehand. Conferences that have it can decide not to give an award to a participant who didn't submit a position paper. So it's basically a longer version of an opening speech. One thing I will say is that the opening speeches and position papers are quite different. An opening speech is built for an audience to listen to. The language will be simpler, shorter words, really factored to be listening, like interesting to a listening audience, as opposed to the position paper, which is the place you would have your students write longer words, really try to write something for writing. If we read out loud some essays which are written, they can be boring. If we read speeches, we may find them, simple, less nuanced, not as engaging to read. So they're quite different, but the concept in both of them is to basically give the CIA in different ways. Awesome.
Would all of your material be available for us even after we finish?
All the material is on the website. It's in the Moodle and the videos that we have. There will also be, I'll talk about after the break about additional places we can find resources. And I'm here if there's any additional questions.
Thank you.
All right, so we're gonna take a break now. Time now is 4:58. Let's meet back here at 5:15 and we'll do attendance and all the other fun stuff. Everyone have a great